Hey, we have you covered every morning. Making money makes sense. Weekdays on CBS Mornings.
The workplace has shifted after 3 years of COVID. What it means for your pursuit of happiness. Join me on Primetime.
Stream on the free CBS News app.
It's a history-making meeting. 4 extraordinary women who are all 4-star generals and admirals.
How did you deal with being discriminated against?
I just worked harder.
The future of an ever-evolving U.S. military. When we go...
Our commitment is to move the data into the United States to be stored on American soil by an American company, overseen by American personnel.
Whenever they download the TikTok app, they are surrendering access to data and information that could go right into the hands of the Communist Party of China.
The Office of Manhattan District Attorney Alvin Bragg says former President Donald Trump created a false expectation of his arrest.
We think you're interfering in his investigation.
Really? He doesn't prosecute anybody, so I don't understand why.
One of the things they said was that you authorize the use of force feeding some of the...
Yeah, that's not true. Yeah. Any of the stuff that people...
Just to finish it, force feeding to detainees who were on hunger strike. Was that true?
So I was a junior officer. I didn't have authority to authorize anything.
Welcome to Red and Blue. I am Major Garrett in Washington. Thank you for joining us. First, TikTok united Americans around, among other things, recipes, dance videos, comic routines, and all manner of social commentary. When I say unite, I mean to the tune of about 150 million Americans who are on the app. Well, today, it is quite clear TikTok has united official Washington, because lawmakers on both sides of the aisle described it variously as a national security threat, a mental health menace, and a propaganda tool of the Chinese Communist Party. More on that in a second. We are, of course, as this broadcast begins, following the latest on a possible indictment of former President Trump. We will, of course, bring you all the developments on that later this half hour. But we begin, as I mentioned at the top, with TikTok and the grilling its CEO got at a House hearing. Lawmakers really pressed that CEO on whether the app is a propaganda tool for the Chinese Communist Party, how it might be engaged in data collection or data scraping, and the effect the app has on the overall long-term mental health of children. The CEO, in the context of all of this barrage of questions, said the app should not be banned. CBS News congressional correspondent Scott MacFarlane joins us now. Scott, that can only be viewed, that is today's hearing, from the perspective of TikTok as an avalanche of criticism and skepticism.
Yeah, let me extend the metaphor, Major, if you don't mind. This day began as an uphill climb for TikTok in Congress, and at the end of this day, it looks like Mount Everest and/or that avalanche you referenced. There was no safe harbor for the CEO of TikTok in the House Energy and Commerce Committee. That became clear. And here's where the rubber hits the road. There's no silver bullet solution for TikTok to satisfy Congress, because Congress doesn't just have one or two concerns. We heard for hours concerns from members of this panel about the Chinese tethers inside TikTok, the way it could be utilized or weaponized to spy on or propagandize Americans. But then there's another group in Congress has concerns about its impact on young people, on their body image, on their mental health, on the addictive nature of the algorithms and this app. And then there's all this concern about it being a platform for misconduct against youth. There's so many different concerns. There really was no singular way for the CEO to satisfy everyone. I could say when he walked in the room today, he told the panel they're going to take very seriously increasing or improving the firewalls to keep Americans' data out of a foreign actor's hands, and that they are taking seriously their mission to protect teenagers and youth. But nobody walked out of this hearing room championing what they heard from TikTok, and for them, that's a problem.
We're going to dig in ever more deeply on this topic with Catherine Herridge to my left here in just one second. But, Scott, while I have you, the Senate Majority Leader Chuck Schumer talked about the debt ceiling today. Catch us up.
Well, there's so many distractions
right now,
on Capitol Hill.
The House seems to be headed not getting off the floor, heading into a brick wall, because they say, you know, unless we get our way, we're going to default, but they won't even say what their way is. They don't have 218 votes to put it together. And so in the past...
There are so many small incremental political stories that can kind of flood the zone here on Capitol Hill, it's easy to lose sight of the crisis that is looming in a matter of weeks. There's been no progress on solving this debt ceiling crisis, no progress on averting a default. The Senate Democratic leader made his case today. We've heard Republicans say that the Biden administration should be extending an olive branch or a phone call for a meeting, but they're still not talking to each other. They're talking past each other, which gets us closer and closer to risky territory with no progress.
And very quickly, Scott, the mother of Ashley Babbitt met with House Speaker Kevin McCarthy today. What is the import of that encounter?
First of all, the symbolism of it. She met with Speaker McCarthy just behind me, down the hall in the Speaker's office. That's just steps away from where Babbitt breached the House Speaker's lobby January 6, 2021. Truly just steps away. It is a political statement by McCarthy to not only have a meeting with Ashley Babbitt's mother, but to do so in a notorious way, in a way that we all could see and know about. We know Ashley Babbitt's mother has been active, advocating for the January 6 defendants, arguing for the House Republicans to investigate. Kevin McCarthy, Major, giving her an audience, gives weight to her argument among her supporters.
Scott McFarland on Capitol Hill, we thank you very much. CBS News senior investigative correspondent Catherine Herridge had the chance to speak with House Intelligence Committee Chairman Mike Turner about the TikTok hearing. She joins us now. Catherine, catch us up.
Well, the congressman told CBS News in its simplest terms that when you download the TikTok app, what you are doing is essentially surrendering access to your personal data, potentially to the Chinese Communist Party. And the chairman said that he expects immediate major changes ahead.
The CEO of TikTok has just testified that there's a firewall that prevents unauthorized foreign access to American user data. Your reaction?
Well, it's not believable, Catherine. What we know is, companies that are controlled by China and are of course, controlled by the Communist Party in China. And, legally, there's no division as there is in our country between government and commerce. This really is something that everyone should be concerned about, because whenever they download the TikTok app, they are surrendering access to data and information that could go right into the hands of the Communist Party in China.
Is the banning...
What the chairman also said is that he sees no immediate way forward for TikTok under its current method of operation. As you mentioned at the top, I mean, this is an area where you have this incredible bipartisan agreement about TikTok being a potential national security threat.
And Catherine, to broaden this out just a second, there have been numerous instances in this country where data breaches have occurred and
Correct.
that data has landed in China. It doesn't show up on the dark web. It's not for sale. They're keeping it. That, it seems to me, intensifies the curiosity and skepticism, if not outright hostility to TikTok.
I've been working in this area for 2 decades, and I think the big picture is the fact that the Chinese Communist Party is about the aggregation of data. So when we look at major thefts like the OPM breach, which was for the SF-86, which was the security
Office
clearance.
of Personnel Management, right?
That's right. The SF-86 is like a roadmap to your entire life. They stole, or they're alleged to have stolen 21 million files, so 21 million Americans holding top secret security clearances. You aggregate that with the healthcare data that's stolen, you start to build a real composite of individuals, making them potential targets for recruitment, for identity theft, or for compromise. And as you rightly point out, this data, when we believe has been stolen by the Chinese, never ends up for sale. That's because it is not a criminal enterprise, it's an intelligence enterprise. And that brings us right back to TikTok and what they believe to be the exposure or potential exposure of the data of 150 million Americans. You start to marry up that data and the way the Chinese military is really harnessing AI or artificial intelligence. I mean, that's where the national security threat sits.
Catherine Herridge, thank you so very, very much. As the U.S. continues to grapple with the fallout from Silicon Valley Bank's collapse, CBS News polling shows kind of a lack of faith in the system overall. According to the data, roughly 3/4 of Americans say that they have some confidence in their bank, but less in the banking industry overall. By contrast, 51% of Americans say the Biden administration is handling banking issues very or somewhat well. Now, that confidence is linked to who people perceive the government is prioritizing. Those who think the Biden administration is trying to protect large investors more than the middle class say they have less faith in its overall success. Much of the focus this week has been on the Manhattan grand jury looking into allegations involving former President Trump. But what has happened here in Washington could pose an even bigger legal threat. Robert Costa joins us with the latest. Next, you are streaming Red and Blue, reporting across the political divide.
Hey there, welcome to The Uplift.
I thought she was a groom, and I stepped back and I went, oh, you're the queen. She's going to be with me every instant that I'm alive.
I just wanted to see if you'd go to Disneyland with me today.
I look over at him and he's smiling.
I'm going to remember that the rest of my life.
They told us when he was going to be born, he was only going to live for 30 minutes. It's really a miracle that he's with us today.
The Uplift. Stream now on the free CBS News app.
When you wake up in the morning, we want to be your go-to team.
On our places, bright, shiny faces.
I don't go to work in the morning. I go for coffee with my two good friends, and we talk about the world.
Your morning routine just got better. CBS Mornings.
An original documentary from CBS reports.
I always tell people that Twitter would not be Twitter without Black Twitter. It's just us being in fellowship with each other.
And it becomes a conversation you don't want to be left out of.
People really started to recognize the power of activism on Twitter.
Based on that one tweet, the hashtag #OscarSoWhite was trending around the world.
If anything has really powered Black Twitter, it's been humor.
If your food ain't right, oh, we're going to tell you about that too.
We tend to create change, create culture and cool.
That's how movements happen on Black Twitter and go beyond more than that.
Black Twitter, the Twitterverse that changed a generation. Now streaming on the free CBS News app.
You ready?
A generation of kids opens up on CBS Reports.
I just want to be like a regular kid.
Their world, their struggles, their voices.
What if I was white?
A lot of people like to call names and make you feel ashamed for being proud of who you are.
Now streaming Gender.
I did not realize that you could change your gender.
Realizing how you feel.
You can be a boy, sometimes you feel like a girl, sometimes you feel like both.
Redefining who you are.
Identify as trans. Gender fluid.
Non-binary and queer.
Is the idea of gender a thing of the past?
And to be yourself, always, no matter what anyone says, I love you.
Are the kids all right? Gender. Now streaming on the free CBS News app.
Stories that inform.
Or you can be really old at 60, and you can be really young at 85.
Inspire.
How do we unlock the power within ourselves to be who we want to be?
And brighten your day.
The best part of fame is making people feel good. Always send the people home happy.
Make every day a little more like Sunday morning.
Here comes the sun.
Stream now on the free CBS News app.
The news doesn't have to always be depressing.
What do you love about running?
It can be uplifting. That human connection that we create on the broadcast every night is incredibly important.
Welcome back to Red and Blue. The Manhattan grand jury looking into allegations against former President Trump met today, but considered evidence in a different case, as grand juries are sometimes allowed to do. Deliberations on the Trump matter are not expected to resume until next week. And I guess you've probably already figured out that means charges against President Trump cannot be expected until at least Monday of next week, if then. CBS News chief election and campaign correspondent Robert Costa joins us now from New York City, where he has been all week long. Robert, catch us up on where things are and what we might be able to imagine will transpire next week.
Major, good to be with you. Right now, here outside Manhattan Criminal Court, the proceedings are delayed. The district attorney, Alvin Bragg, is taking his time in terms of approaching the grand jury eventually with a vote on a possible indictment of former President Trump. At this point, the grand jury could still hear from additional witnesses. That's possible next week. But as with all grand jury proceedings, whether here or elsewhere, as a reporter, trying to be careful in making any predictions. Grand juries are held in secret, and it's hard sometimes to navigate and understand where they're moving in terms of prosecution or not.
Exactly. House Republicans, as you well know, Robert, have raised questions about Alvin Bragg, the DA there in Manhattan, accusing him of either abusing his power or going outside the lines in pursuing this case. As I gather it, Alvin Bragg has responded. Summarize that for our audience, please.
The District Attorney's Counsel, the office, responded today to those requests from House Republican committee chairs. And in short, it was a pushback, an aggressive pushback against these Republicans. And the argument made here by the District Attorney's office was that this is an ongoing criminal investigation in New York, and that congressional oversight of an ongoing criminal city investigation doesn't make sense constitutionally or legally. These House Republicans insist, because federal funds in some ways may be used to supplement a district attorney's office in the city of New York, that they may have some kind of purview over this case. But the argument made by the district attorney's office today was that that perspective was absurd.
And it's worth noting, Robert, some conservative legal scholars have come down on the side of Alvin Bragg on that particular question of jurisdiction and whether Congress ought to be putting its nose in this business at all. On another matter, a few weeks ago, you sat down with former Vice President Pence, and he told you that he would fight all the way to the Supreme Court the subpoena from Special Counsel Jack Smith in his investigation to January 6th and classified documents. In relation to the January 6th, of course, Pence is a key figure. There were legal developments on that front. Please let us know what they are.
What we're seeing right now is an ongoing grand jury investigation of January 6th, led by the special counsel. And the prosecutors want to hear from former Vice President Mike Pence. They know he had direct one-on-one conversations with President Trump in December and January of 2021. Think back to the eve of the insurrection, January 5th, 2021. Pence met one-on-one in the Oval with Trump during the height of Trump's pressure campaign to overturn the 2020 election. Anyone investigating or reporting on January 6th would want to know more about that moment and so many others. The interactions between a vice president who Trump essentially wanted to weaponize to try to make sure he could stay in power. So the special counsel wants Pence to just talk candidly under oath about exactly what transpired. Pence's lawyers are arguing, however, that because he is a former president of the Senate, as you know, vice presidents are both vice president of the United States and president of the Senate simultaneously. Because of that unique positioning constitutionally, Pence's lawyers are arguing he should not be able to testify about something that was a congressional proceeding under what's called the speech or debate clause. That could end up, as Pence has said, before the Supreme Court sometime later this year.
And of course, Robert, it's worth pointing out that as the audience listens to that very good summary you just provided, what the special counsel Jack Smith is interested in is not necessarily what Mike Pence was doing as the presiding president of the Senate as vice president, but what he was doing as the actual vice president in those earlier conversations. And as I gather it, there is a legal argument that that can't be covered by speech and debate clause because in that role, you're the vice president, not the presiding officer of the United States Senate. Am I right about that?
And Pence has also written a memoir about his time on January 6th, and he is detailed in that book and in interviews what he experienced personally, politically, how he thought through his legal positioning with his lawyers like Greg Jacob, his chief of staff, Mark Short at the time. So a lot of Pence's experience is already in the public domain. But because of that president of the Senate role, Emmett Flood, his lawyer, based on our reporting, is ready to try to take this up potentially to the Supreme Court and test out whether Pence can be protected constitutionally from talking very candidly under oath, can never lie under oath, about what Trump said to him.
Robert Costa, thank you very much. Florida Governor Ron DeSantis is already facing scrutiny because he's a likely presidential candidate before he's even jumped into the race. One of the questions, did he advise something that is now regarded as torture while at Guantanamo Bay Detention Center? He was then serving as a legal advisor for the Navy. His answer today, slightly different than the answer he gave about that topic in 2018.
An original documentary from CBS Reports. Controversial Congressman George Santos.
Why won't you answer our questions?
How did he manage to get elected?
Thank you very much, and God bless you, and God bless the USA.
George Santos' campaign was a campaign of deceit, lies, fabrication.
And who is he, really?
I knew him as Anthony DeVolder from Queens.
Really, who he is, he's a fraud.
I compare him to the Tinder swindler.
From people who know him, the truth, the facts, the lies.
He would say that he was worth $100 million.
It's an incredibly cynical episode in American politics, beyond satire.
Had you ever seen anything like this?
No, and I hope I never see it again.
Campaign of Deceit, now streaming on the free CBS News app.
She dazzled on the court and off the court as a businesswoman.
Thank you for joining us on Person to Person. Tennis superstar and entrepreneur Serena Williams.
An original CBS Reports documentary.
I asked my students, what are we going to do about racism in the United States?
The backlash over teaching about racism in American schools.
I don't think it has any place in the classroom.
We can either pretend and say, no, we're not racist and we're all great people, or we can actually start to do the really, really hard work of addressing it.
How did you lose your job? I made the statement that white privilege is a fact.
Is it helping diversity and inclusion?
When you bring in different people's stories and experience, it enriches education.
If you don't talk about something, it doesn't go away.
Or driving us further apart?
What schools are doing to our children in the name of anti-racism is in fact teaching them racism.
The intention is to put us in this war against each other.
An original CBS Reports documentary, streaming now. An original CBS Reports documentary.
I was entitled to equal pay for equal work under the law.
Does the Supreme Court's power need to be checked?
9 Supreme Court justices, 5 of them said no, she's not entitled. That's not right.
Calls to fix the court tend to go along with the politics of the moment.
Republican-appointed justices have all tended to go in one direction, with the Democratic-appointed justices tending to go in another.
Even though it's only 9 justices, it takes 5 of them to make the law of the land.
Does it have political impact? True. Political intent? Probably not true.
If the American people don't trust the judgments of their court, that's a real problem for our democracy.
An original CBS Reports documentary, streaming now.
When you wake up in the morning, we want to be your go-to team.
Your morning routine just got better. CBS Mornings.
Welcome back to Red and Blue. In 2018, then Congressman Ron DeSantis was the underdog in the Republican primary for Florida governor. In August of that year, CBS News Miami investigative reporter Jim DeFede asked DeSantis about his time serving at the Guantanamo Bay Detention Center as a lawyer for the United States Navy.
So were you interviewing terrorists? Were you a legal advisor?
I was a legal advisor.
For those that were doing...
The things that would happen is the thing you notice the day you get down there is for these detainees, the jihad was still ongoing. Right. And they would wage jihad any way they can. Now, they're in a facility, so it's limited, but some of the things they would do hunger strikes, and you actually had 3 detainees that committed suicide with hunger strikes. So everything at that time was legal in nature one way or another. So the commander wants to know, well, how do I combat this? So one of the jobs of the legal advisor would be like, hey, you actually can force feed. Here's what you can do. Here's kind of the rules of that.
The United Nations Human Rights Commission has deemed the practice of force feeding torture. Almost 5 years later, and as a possible 2024 Republican presidential candidate, DeSantis' story has changed slightly, not so much in content, but in emphasis. Here is his exchange with TV host Piers Morgan on his time in Guantanamo.
One of the things they said was that you authorize the use of force feeding.
That's
some of the.
Yeah, that's not true. Yeah, any of the stuff that people.
Just to finish, force feeding the detainees who were on hunger strike. Was that true?
So I was a junior officer. I didn't have authority to authorize anything. There may have been a commander that would have done feeding if someone was going to die, but that was not something that I would have even had authority to do.
So that's wrong.
Yeah, absolutely.
Joining us now is CBS News Miami investigative reporter Jim DeFede. Jim, what is your takeaway from the 2 sound bites our audience just heard?
Well, I think you're right. I don't think they're necessarily in conflict with each other. I think what's really is, it's the context. sort of when I sat down with him in 2018, he was a little bit more expansive. Here, he was trying to knock down the idea that he had anything to do with the force feeding of folks by really relying on the word authorizing. And at no time has anyone ever suggested that Ron DeSantis was the one authorizing the policy towards force feeding of detainees at Guantanamo. You know, the way I like to always describe it is Ron DeSantis was essentially a first-year associate in a very, very large law firm, being the JAG Corps. He was 27 years old in 2006 when he served in Guantanamo. And so he was simply there implementing policies established by others. But it's interesting when you hear him now talking to Tucker Carlson, sort of remove even a lot of that context and almost make it seem as if he was nowhere to be found when it came to this.
And clearly in that interview with you in 2018, it seemed as if, to me, Jim, he was leaning into the idea that it was important that he be a legal advisor, that he was providing that legal advice, and that it was being carried out.
I think you're absolutely right. The other thing that I noticed a lot between the 2018 interview and the interview that it will air later on Fox with Piers Morgan is that you know, Ron DeSantis used the phrase force feed and force feeding. In the Piers Morgan interview, he only refers to it now as feeding or to feed the detainees. And I think that's an interesting thing. Now, there's another interesting parallel here to me. In 2018, Ron DeSantis was sort of introducing himself. At that point, he was still relatively unknown statewide. He was waging a campaign. He had been a congressman for 6 years, and he was sort of introducing himself still. So even his biography, in terms of having served in the military, served in Iraq, served for a period of time at Guantanamo Naval Base, was all relatively new. And it's sort of almost like deja vu all over again. Now, here we are in 2023, he's introducing himself to a national audience, to a worldwide audience, and he's again going through his biography, this time with a few selective edits.
And Jim, we should note that there is nothing wrong with someone in a position as Ron DeSantis was, as a Judge Advocate General for the United States Navy, being gung-ho at one time and then thinking something different about something several years later. Many people have once gone from gung-ho in Guantanamo to reflecting on it differently as the years and the policy and the inability of that policy to achieve certain results has come under scrutiny, and some have reevaluated how good a policy that was in the first place. That's not what we're talking about here. It seems to me there's a larger political conversation among Republican primary and caucus voters, how do you think this is going to land? Because as you and I both recall, I wouldn't say that then candidate Trump won the nomination because he said he was pro-torture, but he certainly didn't lose any momentum over it. And it seems that there's, at minimum, a kind of squeamishness that DeSantis is expressing about that time that he spent in Guantanamo.
No, I agree. And I don't see where this would necessarily hurt him in a Republican primary. I'm not even sure how much of an impact this could have in a general election, because it's also worth noting and remembering that when Barack Obama became president, he also defended the use of force feeding, saying that it was a better alternative to allowing the detainees to die as a result of their hunger strike. So, you know, this is always very tricky waters when you start wading into what happened in Guantanamo. I think this is just part of the maturation process for DeSantis as he moves onto that national stage. This is an early indication of what the types of questions he's going to be asked. And I would have loved and still would love an opportunity to ask him some follow-up questions, more specifically towards how he would define torture, how he, if he does indeed run and was the commander-in-chief, how he would implement what he saw in Guantanamo and what changes he might make if he was the commander-in-chief moving forward. I think those are important questions that he'll eventually have to answer, you know, and I think that it's going to be fascinating to watch as he moves out onto that stage.
And Jim, you were there in 2018. Is it your perspective that on the simple question of the politics in that Republican primary, this aspect of Ron DeSantis' biography, he wanted to lean into with a certain amount of gusto in order to make him look either more heroic or more active in the war on terrorism, however it was conceived of in that time?
Well, I also think, I mean, let's give him credit, too. Not only did he serve for brief periods of time at Guantanamo, he also served as a legal advisor to SEAL Team 1 in Iraq. So one of the things that he did lean into heavily in 2018 when he was introducing himself to voters here across the state was his military record, was the fact that he served, he volunteered, not just served, but volunteered after graduating from Harvard Law School. He went undergrad to Yale, Harvard Law School, and then rather than, as he has pointed out, go into some high-paying job that a Harvard-educated lawyer would naturally land into, he went into the military. So he's very proud, and justifiably so, of his time in the military. And I think that we'll hear more and more about that in the days, months, weeks to come.
With all the context we could have asked for, Jim DeFede, thanks so very much.
Thank you.
And before we go, here in the nation's capital, spring has done what spring is supposed to do. It's sprung, and on time. Visitors from all over the country are currently flocking to D.C. to see this year's cherry blossoms. You can see them right there. These famous trees, originally gifted to the United States from Japan, arrived here first in 1912. The National Park Service says those blooms are expected to reach what we call here in D.C. peak bloom between today and Saturday. That does it for us. You can stream Red and Blue Monday to Thursday at 5 p.m. Eastern. You are streaming CBS News.
In today's Money Watch, business analyst Jill Schlesinger is here to help.
How do you even begin to make the best use of your money? If you've got a match from your employer, don't give away that money.
Dollar Jill, y'all.
CBS Mornings.